What's up, guys, and welcome to episode 100 of the NeoVintage podcast. I'm Jabro, and I'm here with
Steve. Hope everyone's doing well.
And for you guys who have never seen the show before, we're just two guys that like to talk over the biggest stories in gaming, but we always like to start with what we've been playing. So, Steve, what you been playing?
Yeah, so a little mix of two things, really. I was on vacation, so it kind of interrupted my game time, but finally completed Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, the campaign anyway, I guess you could say. Completed that, again, quickly rose up in one of my favorites. I don't know if I beat it last time I discussed, we talked, we may or may have not, but great finale. What a great finale. Really just, I had a really good time with it. Went in a slightly different direction where I thought it was going, especially for Zelda games. Zelda games usually wrap up so nicely, and it's like, okay, boom, you're done. This one had a sort of crescendo, a little come to a conclusion, felt satisfying, and is in a spot where they, I guess, could make a third one in this world. I kind of hope they don't, because I feel like they've kind of explored a lot already. But also, it doesn't feel like it needs to. Like, if we look at just Breath of the Wild and Tears, it's going to be a complete journey. So I really had a lot of good time with it. The ending, again, one of the more memorable boss fights. Obviously, I liked it way more than just fighting a purple smoke, which was Calamity Ganon in Breath of the Wild. Obviously, this one you fight Ganon. It's not a spoiler, but you fight Ganon. So yeah, I had a lot of fun times with it. I'm still every once in a while turning it on, doing a few other missions. Trying to collect a few different items. Because I got to assume there will be DLC coming. So I want to stay pretty up high on my stats, get a couple more hearts, keep my stamina high, things like that. Because again, I would be shocked if they don't do DLC to this, especially since the DLC to Breath of the Wild was very difficult. I never even got to go through it all because of how difficult it was. So I'm trying to pre-plan ahead, and just making sure I've got all my good gear, real good gear. So fantastic. One of my favorite Zelda games. I could probably easily put it in my top 5. I have to do some sort of ranking one day to see where this all sort of shuffles through, just because, again, the story really did carry it. The story that I was craving in Breath of the Wild finally appeared here in Tears of the Kingdom. So the only other thing I've been playing, and I haven't played too much, I want to say maybe I'm 5 hours in, and we discussed it last time. We both played the demo. Final Fantasy 16 has released, I think. Again, we both tried the demo, and I think it released after our last recording, so I haven't had too much time with it, because again, I wasn't home, obviously, and so it sort of disrupted my time. But I'm a couple hours in, and I really like it. I have this joke with another friend of mine. We call it Final May Cry of Thrones. Just because it is well, I know you've played a lot of it. It's really those three things put together. But I'm really liking it. I do really like it. There was a little bit at the beginning of the game where they're throwing terms and names, and games almost on an autoplay where you're just pushing square to get through everything, where I was a little worried. I was like, man, is this too far gone from Final Fantasy? Because besides like the appearance of like a chocobo in the first 2 hours, nothing really speaks Final Fantasy to me besides some of the aesthetic. But all my worries kind of went away as I finally got past that little truck of like what I've played in the demo. So where the demo ends and the rest of the story sort of continues, obviously, on the full game. Now I'm started liking it. I kind of like where some of these twists are going. I like some of these characters. I finally feel like they just are a little bit more fleshed out. Even though there's one of the early twists, you could see coming if you looked at the cover of the game. It's pretty obvious of a twist, but all in all, I am liking it. Again, it is in this weird spot where I'm like, I love Devil May Cry games, so the hard shift to an action game is a little jarring, but it doesn't bother me. Where people who are really big fans of like deep RPG mechanics, I can see why the game's kind of polarizing in that sense, because it's very limited. Which is a weird thing that this is from the Final Fantasy 14 team, which went super hard MMORPG. But I'm actually really liking it. Again, it's such a weird twist to play something like we were playing so much of Tears of the Kingdom to something very high quality. And Tears of the Kingdom has its high quality standards and stuff, but in a Nintendo way, this is like a full-fledged. You look at it, it looks AAA. looks great. The voice acting, for the most part, I like. There's one or two characters that sound a little funky, and the lip syncing is a little weird, but I think it's because it's synced to Japanese. But besides that, I'm actually really intrigued to get on with the story. I don't know how long the whole game ends up being. Again, I do like that it's not this huge open world. I kind of always know where I'm going, just kind of going point to point. It's a little more linear, I think, in the right way so far. I'm sure the game opens up. I heard it opens up a little more later on, becomes a little more what we're used to in a Final Fantasy. But obviously, that's probably hours ahead. But all in all, I'm really liking it. That's the next game I'm kind of just playing, and I don't think there's anything else coming up immediately, so I can actually take my time with it, as I took my time with Zelda. So those are the two things I spent my time with. What have you been playing?
Yeah, I guess I'll just continue where you left off. I've also been playing Final Fantasy 16. I am, I think, just under 15 hours in. Okay. So I guess timeline-wise, you could probably place me somewhere in the middle-ish. From what I understand, it's it's a 30-35 hour game if you're like mostly story focused. However, I am doing all the side quests as they present themselves, but that is not as big of a feat as maybe it sounds. It's as you kind of alluded to, a very, very, very linear game. I like it quite a bit. I think the interesting thing about it is I've heard the critiques, and I think there are absolutely things you could critique about this game, but it's not some of the critiques I'm hearing a lot about. I've heard the whole, like, is this even a Final Fantasy thing, which is hilarious because anybody who's been in gaming, maybe since early 2000s or late 90s, has heard that from every mainline Final Fantasy since 6, pretty much. When 7 came out, all this technology, this is not Final Fantasy. You're gonna be in school, that's not Final Fantasy. And they said that about 9 because it looked like a Disney movie. So they've said that about every Final Fantasy game, so that didn't bother me or deter me too much, because what does Final Fantasy even mean anymore, to be honest with you, other than kind of just a franchise that has maybe fixed, it's not even a fixed mechanic, it's like fixed characters that kind of reoccur, general themes, but and all those themes are technically present, even though maybe they are a little bit more subtle in this one, I would say. But I think that's a nice turn coming off of like what 14 and 15 were, and kind of coming off of 7 remake. I think this is kind of a breath of fresh air in the way that it feels familiar, but also technically it's uncharted territory. We've never seen Final Fantasy this dark before. That's the big thing that I think kind of differentiates it, that maybe people don't talk about as much, is it's by far the most graphic of the Final Fantasy games. The language is the harshest. It plays with some of the heaviest themes. You see straight up, like, I mean, this is not a spoiler, but you'll see like mass death. That's never been depicted in a Final Fantasy game before. So that's where I think the real change is. It's a much more mature game. And it's a very bleak game, to be honest with you. They don't really let up and have these happy moments that often. So at times it can be kind of a heavy and oppressive game. But I'm really, really impressed by it. The visuals are gorgeous. The combat's really great. Obviously, there could be critiques there about the lack of real significant RPG mechanics. There's no strats that you can go into a battle with, really, other than general preparedness. Do you have your potions? Are you leveled up enough for it? And do you understand how to hit? Then you're good to go, pretty much, for the most part. There's no real casting haste or depending, who's in your party. None of that really comes into play. So that's absolutely a fair critique. However, I think they've made it clear that in the general direction that Final Fantasy games, Octopath Traveler, stuff like that triangle strategy would probably be more of your speed. And you could go more into that direction if you're looking for more of like a strategic old school Final Fantasy. They're obviously going way, full action adventure. Some of the cons are, just to be kind of fair about it, generally speaking, love the game. But to be fair about it, the cutscene thing, I think, is a valid critique. I've seen people go back and forth about it. Is there too much cutscenes? Is there not enough cutscenes? Which you could have. So yeah, I would say this: if you are a big fan of 10, I don't think this is going to be a massive departure for you. 10 is also obscenely heavy in the cutscene department, but yeah, if you came to get a little bit more used to 7, 8, 9, maybe you played a bit of 10, then this might be a bit much for you. I find it to be a bit much for me at times. And I would say this is an absolute fair statement that when I go to sit down and play, and maybe I play like a 2.5 hour session, like a solid session, 75% of that will be me sitting there watching cutscenes. So it's not even half and half. It's like overwhelmingly more cutscene than, and you could skip cutscene if you would like, but obviously you'll miss key plot details. Yeah. So yeah, it is very 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 cutscene heavy, and at times I see things depicted that I could have played. And so that could be at times where I'm kind of like, oh, come on, guys. It could be a bit much after a while, or I'm like, give me a break, let me play, please. And that doesn't seem to let up. I'm 14 hours in. It's pretty much just as cutscene heavy now as it was then. Shy of times that I've dedicated myself to maybe finishing the side quests. And so that can be a critique. It's something that, because the story is so good, I'm more okay with it. But I could totally see that being a turnoff to somebody. And then maybe the one last critique I would have of it would be that the side quests are very, very, very shallow. They're very fetch questy. So like you go to a location, maybe fight some scorpions, grab an item, bring it back. Or, hey, I need these seeds. Can you bring it to this person? And then you walk to the person, you give them the seeds, and quest complete. Like it literally, hasn't really gotten any deeper than that. There hasn't been any real major story kind of revealed through side quests. If anything, you kind of just get some contextualization to some of the world that you exist in, and then there are some added benefits later on. By helping people out, you kind of have like a general score that of like, hey, this is like, you get people's allegiance basically from like contributing. Not a spoiler, it's just a mechanic that they kind of unlock later on. And I can appreciate it from that regard. So it's really easy to keep up with them just as they present themselves. They don't really present any more than like 2 at a time. Then you could go ahead and tackle that. In terms of whether or not it opens up, I won't obviously speak about any narrative. It does and it doesn't. Like every fixed area is essentially pretty linear because there are items scattered around some of the more open areas, but there are no, it's not Breath of the Wild where you like climb up a mountain, you might see something weird and it's like, oh, what's this cave? Let me go through this cave. Oh, there's a random enemy. I'm not bumping into that. You'll see some kind of like, even calling them a mini boss, like just more a powerful enemy that you can like fight in certain areas and maybe get like a crafting item or something like that. But I wouldn't say that there's a super big incentive to explore or much out there. They have some areas that are open technically and you could run from kind of one section of the map to the next, but there's not much in between it. And you'll only get use of certain parts of that map through side quests, for example, or through the way the story kind of unloads. They'll have you run over to that corner that maybe you spotted an hour ago or something like that. So, it does open up, but not really in the traditional Final Fantasy. It's not Final Fantasy 13. The way like it was like the hallway simulator and then it does open up into a full open world game. This one,
25 hours in.
Yeah, it's not really like that per se. It's more so that the environments that you go into kind of become a little bit more expansive and you make more use of the disconnected parts of the map, and you could kind of run from one sector to another and fight different enemies and gives you a chance to level up and stuff like that. That all exists, but I wouldn't say that at any point you are in this like robust, crazy, explorable open world. That's not really what they're trying to do here. For the most part, every open area is kind of a means from getting from point A to point B, and then they kind of just alter traversal, if anything, like, oh, you can go a little bit faster now or whatever. Totally fine with me. I think this game is a great game for anybody who maybe prefers some of the older Final Fantasies. Not in the mechanics, but maybe in the themes. If you're really into 5 and 6, for example, 4, 5, 6, I think, yeah, you'd probably be really into this. If you came in, I could totally understand if you like, especially if you jumped in, maybe you're a little younger, to like 7 Remake. I think that maybe did a little bit of a better job incorporating side quests and making them matter and making them fun, and making you appreciate Midgar more in that regard. That's the only thing I would say is it's a taste thing, kind of like any other Final Fantasy. Some people really love 15, and so it kind of depends on your taste, but I highly recommend it to most people, unless you're a really hardcore RPG person. Then kind of stick over to the other Square offerings. So yeah, Final Fantasy 16. I'll probably have more to say about it as kind of time progresses and I get deeper into it. It's probably likely that I'll be either close to the ending or done with it by the time we do the next show, because I'm for the most part focused on this game. The other game I've been playing, and don't laugh at me, is just Crazy Taxi. I've been playing that a lot lately. I don't know why. I played it periodically throughout pretty much my entire life. I have like, I'm not joking, like maybe 6 versions of that game for various different consoles. I pretty much just buy it everywhere I go, and I like it a lot. And I've been actually, for the first time in my life, trying to play very deliberately and effectively. And so I'm trying to get Class S on all like arcade speeds, so 3 minute, 5 minute, 10 minute. And I just did all 3. So I'm getting Class S licenses for all the different times and with different drivers. And yeah, it's really fun. And now I'm developing like Crazy Taxi strats. And again, I told you, don't make fun of me. How dare you? But yeah, no, I'm having a great time with it. Right now, my primary place to play it is Steam Deck. No surprise, it runs great there. It's actually natively on Steam, so you could just buy it on Steam and play it there through the little Dreamcast collection. And it's generally very well optimized, looks beautiful, as you would hope it would. I mean, it's a really powerful console. The only thing is, maybe some of the songs are missing. The little Offspring opening that everybody like talks about, that's not in that game, but that hasn't been in any of the official releases since like PS3. I don't know. It's been a really long time. So that's not surprising there. But yeah, Crazy Taxi, that's been great, and I've had a great time with it, and I'm going to continue playing it. I'm not done with it. I also went back to Vampire Survivor to kind of just play some of the DLC and get used to that. It's one of those things where I have not all the characters, but a vast majority of them. I've unlocked pretty much every stage. The only thing that happens is around like the 30-minute mark, I keep dying from death, and I don't really know how to bypass that. So I'm working on that. But other than that, I've kind of done everything. So it's kind of... Vampire Survivor has become a little bit tougher to play because I can't do anything below a 25-minute session for a single game. Yeah. Just because it's one of those games that compound. As you play it more, you unlock more. And as you unlock more, you become more powerful sooner. So you can go longer. And as you go longer, next thing you know, it's like, well, I can't die quickly anymore. You know what I mean? But the characters that I use, it doesn't happen. So sometimes it's just a matter of like, I have to like set it down and like make a coffee and like just come back and I'm still alive. I have sustained no damage, and I'm just like level 25, and I just have to click A couple times because I've unlocked some levels. So Vampire Survivor continues to be a great game. It's apparently coming out on Switch soon, which I'm not gonna get it in Switch obviously, but I am super fascinated to see how that runs, because I'm obviously in what you would consider, I guess, the late game of Vampire Survivor, if there is one. And the assets on screen, like if you showed it to somebody, it's comical. Where I'm in the hundreds of bullets and fragments and enemies being slashed at once. And I get frame dips on the Steam Deck because of how much is moving there. I don't understand how this could even... What, are you going to lower the resolution of a pixel game? Like, I don't understand how this is going to work. But I've just been playing those 3 things. So Steam Deck and Final Fantasy, and it's been great, and it's a nice little breather moment where I can kind of focus on Final Fantasy as my main game, but then when I kind of want a breather, I have all this nonsense to play. And it doesn't really seem until... So we have Rain Code that's coming out on Switch, or that I think is already out. That's from the Danganronpa team that I'm going to jump into once I'm done with Final Fantasy. But other than that, I don't think anything's coming out until September? I think September and October is when all the big ones come out. So
there's I always forget the name. Not to come off what team. There's that classic RPG looking game. I know that's in August. I want to say it was August.
Oh yeah. I know what you're talking about. I can't remember the name either.
Is it Sea of Stars? Maybe.
What was it?
I can't. Is it not Sea of Stars?
Oh, it's Star Ocean.
No, not Star Ocean.
Oh, not that one.
Man, I can't believe we're pulling a blank here. Let me see.
But yeah, that would be in August. So we still pretty much have
Sea of Stars. Sea of Stars is the one.
Oh, is it Sea of Stars?
29th.
Okay.
Yep.
So
classic RPG looking one.
So we still got some like time to kind of like spend on Final Fantasy, which is good. I like the breather. I got a breather for Zelda. I don't like too much at the same time. And October looks nuts because I think it's gonna be like Spider-Man and Assassin's Creed and everything. So
yeah, it's gonna be much there. Yeah, it sounds like you got that nice balance. And the last thing we saw, I am curious also on how Vampire Survivor is going to run on Switch, because the Switch is also getting I don't know if it's an exclusive mode, but they're getting a co-op mode, which doesn't make any sense to me. So I wonder how that's going to even...
Sounds even more demanding. I don't understand.
Yeah. That is a weird choice, but...
I think it can run. I think it can run up until a point. Like, yeah, I totally believe that, like, the first 10 to 15 hours of, like, a player's time in Vampire Survivor would go without issue. That's no problem. You throw a little garlic on, you walk around, it's fine. That's no big deal. My question is, once you start having the mechanics that are, like, enemies are not getting within 20 feet of you type thing, and you have like maxed out garlic and like the blue wand, and you've turned your flame wand into like meteors, and you're like you have the what is it called, the orb attract thing on, so you're not even needing to move near the XP thing, and maybe you have like an XP buff on or something like that. And like I just don't understand how like at that point how it could even run, because I've just seen it get framey. But again, I guess I'll say this: when it comes to Steam development, Switch development is so much comes down to developer, I guess. Like technically, I mean, they got Doom running beautifully on that console. So I mean,
very surprised, yeah.
If you know what you're doing and your game is equipped to run on that kind of hardware, then I suppose it could work. But I'm like morbidly curious, and because it's so cheap, like I don't want to buy the game again. But like, will I buy the game again? If it's possible. All things are possible. I'll keep an open mind.
Very true. Very true.
But all right. Big story. Microsoft versus the FTC. This has been going on all week. There's been a ton of revelations. So we're going to try to summarize it as best as we can and kind of go point by point. Each point, I mean, is damn near its own topic. So we'll try to make decent time with this. But yeah, the week-long court battle between Microsoft and the United States Federal Trade Commission has come to a close as the FTC delivered its closing arguments Thursday. And so here's some of what happened. So for you guys that don't, a quick recap: Microsoft is trying to acquire Activision, and the FTC is trying to block it, basically, because basically anti-monopoly and anti-competitive law type of concerns, basically. So first one, Microsoft claims that Bobby Kotick demanded a bigger revenue share to put Call of Duty on Xbox. Obviously, and this ties into another point that they had made about the value of Call of Duty, is that with an acquisition as big as Activision and IP as big as Call of Duty, it does not surprise me that gives Activision tremendous leverage pretty much with all the developers or major publishers of what they want to do. What were your thoughts about this specific claim?
Yeah, every time I see his name, man, I roll my eyes.
Boom, Bobby Kotick.
Bobby Kotick, yeah, because he's disappeared, but at the same time, he's trying to run away with so much money at this
Yeah,
situation.
he's an a-hole.
Which is why it didn't surprise me when he was starting to demand bigger revenue shares to put it on Xbox. It makes me also just wonder what other conversations were going, because the only other place to put it would be, obviously, PlayStation. So I wonder what those other conversations were, but... Yeah, I just thought I saw this and I was like, it just sounds like a scum move from him. I'm just also curious on like what also Xbox and Call of Duty used to be kind of hand in hand. So the fact that here we are, this many years later, and it's like, no, you want it, then you gotta give me more money, which is it's terrible. But look who it's coming from.
Yeah, and we could probably get into it later, but this whole. I still just have a hard time believing the idea of like at any point Microsoft or Activision allowing Call of Duty to be a single platform game, or even double if you want to count Nintendo, but off of PlayStation. I just don't see it. I see it just yes, I understand that, and well, that kind of ties into the next point that Microsoft is in that consistent third place. But I'm sure the revenue garnered from that console over the past. I mean, Call of Duty started in 03, 04, but it really came together in 07 with Modern Warfare, something like that around there. that like we're talking about millions and millions of dollars that have been kind of come from that single platform. The idea that like in any way Microsoft or even Activision would allow them to just cut that off for exclusivity or from PlayStation, I mean, like it's so unlikely. Like especially with the way that they've treated kind of like Minecraft. I think Microsoft is willing to keep things multi-platform where it makes sense. Like yeah, there's certain things that I wouldn't be surprised from like Bethesda that are gonna be locked in, but like yeah, I just don't see the Call of Duty thing. The next major point that I think is something very interesting that we should talk about is Microsoft admits that Xbox has lost the console wars, and basically the idea is that it's been consistently in third place behind Sony and Nintendo in market share since the original Xbox launched over 20 years ago, and this seems to keep in line, mind you, with what oh my God, now I'm blinking on his name. What Phil Spencer, there we go. What Phil Spencer said during that Kind of Funny interview during the Xcast. Basically, that said that, you know, he's not super convinced that, like, even exclusives is really going to right this ship. That you could call it defeatist, you could call it realistic, but it's an assessment of the current landscape and the historical landscape, which is that they've never won before, and I think a lot of people would associate maybe the 360 era with the like closest thing to a win. But I you unfortunately need to remember that things did switch in the late part of that generation when PlayStation went really cheap. They were able to pass the 360's selling rate, so they lost that generation too. So even when they were winning for a majority of that generation, when all was said and done, the PS3 did usurp the 360 in terms of sales. So yeah, they were never in the first place, and it doesn't seem like they have an interest in pretending like that's going to change. However, I think it's also worth noting, and I mentioned this during the Phil Spencer interview, is that I believe that Microsoft has a vested interest at this point. They have money involved with the idea that they are not a threat to Sony. And I know for the console warriors that might be like a wild thought to have, but this is from Microsoft's mouth. When you're trying to make an acquisition this big, and the concern and argument against you is, hey, you're going to control too much of the market, you're going to have too much power. If you want that to go through, I think there's an honest, vested interest you might have in tempering that discussion down by maybe call it spinning a narrative that no, don't worry, we're not anywhere close to dominating anything because we've consistently lost every single generation, so there's no acquisition we could even make to really right that ship. What did you think about this point?
Yeah, again, it threw back a lot of sort of flashbacks to what Phil Spencer said a few weeks ago. And it makes sense. I think it is something they, in a way, have to admit to get this finally to go through. Like, listen, not only are we losing the console wars, not have we lost battles before. No, we've lost it. There is, hate on PlayStation as many people want. There is this sort of momentum that they've got that it just doesn't seem to stop. And Nintendo's the same way. Nintendo, I mean, we haven't gotten a Switch whatever Pro or whatever, a successor to the Switch, and it's going on 6 years almost, something like that. We're looking at
2017,
2017. So, and those are still selling like it just dropped yesterday, So it is that factor that they have to do admit it, and I think that's when it makes it very clear from like our side of the point. Obviously we don't have any money invested into the companies, but it shows that it's like everything they're doing is just for them now to sustain their players and make them happy. They're not. I don't think they're. On a small part, they're gonna always want to beat PlayStation, beat Nintendo. But I think they've long gone that sort of concept. So it just makes sense, and it's something that, I mean, to have not Bobby Kotick, Phil Spencer admit it and everything was one thing. To have Microsoft come up and say this in a court is something that this is on record forever now. Was actually a big deal that they were even just sort of man enough to admit it, which was slightly shocking. Like, the actual thing isn't shocking, but it's shocking who said it is what really threw me off.
Yeah, I think people kind of forget that, so much of this is strategy. and kind of framing and just this is what the numbers say, and you have to interpret it and spin the narrative that you want. And also, people forget that when Phil Spencer did that interview and kind of started this narrative of like, hey, we're in that consistent third place, we've lost, we're not going to out console Sony. That was a PR campaign. That when he was on, that's his job. His job is not to play real like, hey, I'm a real gamer like you. I mean, I know he says that, and that's all good and fine. And hey, I like Phil Spencer as well. So, but you have to remember, like these is, a lot of this is PR spin. Sony's gonna do it. Activision's gonna do it, and Xbox is gonna do it. And so much of this is framing. The next one is one that I think really caught a lot of headlines, but it makes a lot of sense if you kind of just do the math on it. But Microsoft expects the next console generation of consoles to come out in 2028. That is 8 years after the initial one. The initial one came out, I think, in November 2020, something around there. And so that would be 8 years. That is in line with every previous generation. So I don't think this is like some crazy revelation. Yeah, I think you could probably have done the calculation that, around 2027, 2028, that would make around the sense where the next proper generation of console would come out. Obviously, before that point, I expect some kind of pro iteration in the, 2024, 2025, time period, just again following historical trends. So this one wasn't like a mind-blowing thing. I think it's just maybe always exciting or surprising when you hear the publishers themselves say it, as opposed to kind of just generalized speculation or some developer being like, hey, we have dev kits for this, when you actually hear from like, hey, this is not even an announcement, but this is the closest thing I guess people get, where it's like, yeah, Microsoft next generation 2028, like that. I think excites a lot of people. What do you think?
Same, yeah. It made a lot of sense where I'm like, yeah, that's probably where it would be an 8-year cycle. Even in this day seems a tad bit long, but it made a lot of sense. That it did like sort of cement in my mind that they're like, oh, so they're gonna have a series, whatever Z or whatever they're gonna call it. Probably you're looking 2025ish, 2026 maybe, just to keep that refresh going until you completely do whatever your next generation is called. That's all it did for me, where I was like, it is exciting though, because now once like 2026, 2027 starts coming around, we're going to start hearing those weird dev kit rumors and all this stuff going on. So it'll be exciting to see that, especially where, I mean, this is a different take, but you got to remember in 2026, they're going to be prepping their new generation, which means, I mean, Sony has that in-house studio that does the MLB game that is on Xbox now, so they'll have a dev kit, which is funny because if you look later, we have a sort of a discussion over.
Oh yeah, the dev kit stuff. Yeah,
the dev kit stuff. So it'll be really interesting if that whenever they do, they're gonna have to send one to Sony if they want the MLB to keep rolling over there. So it'd be an interesting time. But yeah, it's just nice to sort of have a light game plan, like when to look forward. Because just that time around new technology is so exciting, especially for us. We just love this, just in that ecosystem.
Yeah, I think, and this is kind of my general issue with, like, when you have these kind of consolidation, acquisition, mergers, call it whatever you want, and things start getting muddier with, like, okay, so now this developer that was kind of like either a unique independent player or maybe kind of was like just multi-plat, played well with everybody, and then they get acquired by one of the three, let's say, even though Nintendo doesn't make acquisitions like that, but they have Raven, for example, or no. Yep. Xbox has Raven now or something like that. Not Raven. What is their name? Rare. There we go. Rare. You end up in that weird situation now that maybe didn't happen previous generations, where you'll have this weird situation where you own something, but it's going to publish on a different platform, and if you want to be there for launch to make your money, they need the dev kit, but you don't want to send the dev kit to the opposition. And this didn't happen a long time ago because, again, the exclusive were the exclusive. The people that they owned are the people that they owned, and you didn't have to worry about that. But now this is a weird zone where the more Microsofts are not the more Minecrafts that you get, the more the MLB, the shows that you have. This is going to only become more and more common. And eventually I feel like Sony and Xbox inevitably have to make a game plan here. Something. We can't, either these games are not going to be anywhere in relation to a launch and they're just gonna have to launch afterwards because of a possible conflict. Like, hey, sorry, Minecraft team, but we can't have you at launch on our console because we can't risk Xbox like having our new console. You'll just have to start developing after release, basically. Which is an option, but I don't think it's a sustainable option because these games are only going to increase in quantity, the amount of affected things as more acquisitions happen, which based on this court case doesn't sound like Microsoft is intending on slowing down anytime soon. Neither does Sony. So, I think they really do need to come together and it's like, all right, listen, this is how it's going to work. This is maybe the timeline. I think inevitably they're going to have to learn to send each other dev kits and what that means. And if that means kind of siphoning away a first-party team so that they don't speak to the other ones while they're working on a launch game for that, so be it. But I wouldn't be surprised if something like that is eventually kind of developer announced.
Yeah.
Next one, Xbox boss Phil Spencer tells Judge, "I will do whatever it takes to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation," which is about as flat as a confirmation as you can get. Which means that their intention, at least externally, what you could speculate all day about, like what their secret goals are, but at least their external, like marketing, like this is words out of their mouth, is that they intend to keep it multi-platform, which is again unsurprising when you understand how much money is being grossed from this franchise. Why would you? Like, I think obviously this thing that is scary to PlayStation, I don't think is exclusivity, despite what they say. I think it's Game Pass day one that scares the crap out of PlayStation. I think PlayStation probably expects to keep getting Call of Duty, and I don't think Microsoft is stupid enough to kind of just cut off that base. But I think it's that day one on Game Pass for not free, but it's that idea that like, okay, you pay this monthly thing and now you'll have access to the new Call of Duties. That is what scares Sony, which is why I think Xbox can say this. Like, yeah, we'll keep putting it on PlayStation. That's fine. You'll just have to pay for it full price. Or maybe you won't get it as early as us. But they never said, hey, we're going to keep putting Call of Duty on PlayStation. It's also going to maybe be on their subscription service. And it's also going to be day one with us. They never said all that. They just said, hey, we want to keep it on PlayStation. Which I think I was not surprised by that whatsoever. What's your thoughts?
No, yeah, it's this weird thing, right, with Call of Duty, and if it's coming, how long is it coming to PlayStation? Like, I feel like it's been like a year now that we keep coming up with this.
Yeah, it's been a
while. And how much clearer that, and then you put it in the best way possible. Yes, Call of Duty will be coming to PlayStation for probably a long time. I mean, wasn't their original offer like 10 years or something like that?
Yeah.
But
and that's the initial contract. That doesn't mean that like at 10 years it just gets pulled off.
No, 10 years they have to redo the contract.
Exactly.
But the big thing that they're not telling you is, oh yeah, you can go pay $70 now on PlayStation, or for $15 a month, you can just play a day one on Game Pass. And at that point, if it would be first party, I'm assuming it would come to PC Game Pass as well, which would be kind of interesting to see. But that's really where it is, and it's funny because it's like a half, like that's what PlayStation's scared of, right? But that's what also excites other people. Like you and I are pretty quick when we play our Call of Duty and we're over in a month. I'd rather pay $15 Game Pass, knock out Call of Duty, and then be done with it, instead of waiting for a super sale. And it'd be the cheapest option. Even on sale we get the game like $30, where Game Pass would make it so much easier. But that's what they are afraid of. So that's why I think they're so confident when they're able to say this over and over and over on the record that we're gonna keep Call of Duty there. Will it be forever? I don't know. Who knows? But for the foreseeable future, for this generation, probably the next generation as well, it'll be coming to PlayStation. You're just gonna have to pay a premium to do it, or you can come over to this side, play it day one, or play it on your PC or your cloud or whatever it is. And that is what scares PlayStation. That's why they're always picking and choosing how they phrase that Call of Duty will come to PlayStation.
Yeah, and you kind of phrased it perfectly, where it's like the more entrenched players, the competitive players, all of that, people who've been playing Call of Duty with maybe a fixed friend group for God knows how long, those people are going to be unaffected by, I think, most of all of this. If you're on Xbox, you're on Xbox. If you're on PlayStation, you're on PlayStation. I don't think any of that changes whoever owns Xbox, however the release strategy, or whoever owns Activision, whatever the release strategy is, they're entrenched. what that affects is, you perfectly put it, is the me's and you's out of the world who maybe play that 10 to 15 hours, once a year when it does come out, and then we move on because neither of us are like hardcore Call of Duty fans. I like we both like the campaign, maybe play a little zombies, maybe play a little multiplayer, and then we move on to the next one. Or the next game or whatever. And especially if you're a multi-plat gamer, which you and I are, historically I've played a majority on PlayStation, and for Call of Duty. And the reason for that is because when I do seldomly play online, most of the people I know are on PlayStation who play Call of Duty. However, if we're talking the difference between my Game Pass existing subscription and a $70, I will bypass that completely. I'm just going to play it on Game Pass. It is what it is. If you don't... I don't have that many friends on Xbox. It is what it is. Sorry, guys, I'm not going to be able to play with you. I'm not spending that $70 if I can get it existing on Game Pass. So you and I are a perfect example of what Sony is scared of. Is the people that don't have a hard... entrenched commitment to staying in the PlayStation ecosystem for Call of Duty. So you and I are just like, oh, it's on Game Pass? All right, I'll just play it there. They just technically lost two gamers right there, who otherwise would have bought a full-priced game that you and I are not going to buy that game. So I understand PlayStation's concern in that regard, but at the same time, and we can talk about our final thoughts when this is all said and done about what we think about this merger, but to a certain extent, it sounds like a PlayStation problem. You know what I mean? Like, it sounds like a you problem. You know what I mean? Yeah, I know that's annoying, but you know what it kind of reminds me of? You remember being back in the school, the one person who had a PS2 and everybody else was playing Halo?
Yeah.
And they were just pissed, and it's like, hey, I want Halo. I don't want to play Killzone anymore. And it's like, I totally get it, but it sounds kind of like a you problem. You know what I mean? Like, the exclusive thing is a tough game, man. I'm a multi-plat gamer. I don't know what to tell you. And the next one, Elder Scrolls 6, still 5+ years away. PlayStation version is undecided. So here's a couple things. There's just kind of 2 points here. We'll kind of break them up apart. First one, we both knew that Elder Scrolls 6 was like way far away, so that's unsurprising. They've, I think, admitted themselves that they announced that way too early, so that was kind of shown graphically off with like Starfield at the same time. So kind of a ridiculous move, I think, on Bethesda's part, because that was pre-acquisition, so that was a Bethesda decision, I'm pretty sure. A stupid one, I think. All we could admit, we don't. If it's that far off, the game probably didn't even exist when they showed something.
It was after the Fallout 76 debacle. That's
you're
why.
Right. So it's an Overwatch 2 thing, basically.
Yeah, it was just to
get the headline.
Some points, yeah.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure the game didn't really even exist when they showed off that little graphic. I think, if anything, this is my guess, this is my speculation, that's probably just concept art that they had when developing the general aesthetic for it. They slapped a logo on it, and they're just, here you go, Elder Scrolls 6. Other than that, I bet they didn't have nothing on the background. Maybe Todd Howard writing something on a piece of paper somewhere. But so before we get onto the second part of it, Elder Scrolls 6 being 5 years away, what are your thoughts about it? I'm unsurprised. Doesn't really bother me because I knew it was not coming anytime soon. What do you think?
Yeah, it's one of those non-story type deals, right? We get this constantly. Oh, Nintendo's making another Mario Kart. Yeah, no. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, Elder Scrolls 6 is being made. Yeah, so is Fallout 6. They're just not talking, or Fallout 5, whatever. What Fallout are we on? Fallout, the next Fallout is obviously in development too. They're not going to announce it. You shouldn't. But again, this came at a point where 76 was such a bad stinker on them that they were like, oh, we got to show it. So when they're like, it's 5 years away, I'm like, yeah, you guys haven't launched Starfield. Of course, Elder Scrolls is not like next year or anything like that. So we've always estimated Elder Scrolls 6 to be like 2026, so it would kind of make sense.
Well, they didn't even make a commitment that it's going to be coming out on this generation. That told me everything I needed to know.
Yeah, all they've said is the game is being made, which is, again, no duh.
Yeah, they never ever said, hey, this is coming out on PS5 and Xbox Series X and S. They never said that. When asked about that, they wouldn't even make a commitment that it would be this generation. They were just like, no, we're going to do Starfield, and then we're going to do Elder Scrolls 6. That's all we know. So if it's 5+ years, 5 plus 2023, that's 2028. That's probably a launch game. That it's probably going to be cross-gen, if my guess is. It's probably going to be on this very late this generation, and then it'll have its next gen version. It's going to be the Breath of the Wild, type of situation. So yeah, unsurprising there for anybody who's been paying attention. But there was a contingent of people who were really thrown off by that headline, but I think they were just not paying close attention, because I think there was this idea that maybe Starfield and this were like really kind of overlapped in development, which I don't think so. I think they were kind of I'm sure everything's a Venn diagram. I doubt that they like go gold on Starfield and then start on you know what I mean. This is not James Gunn making Peacemaker season 2. They were like they wait on one thing, release it, and then it's not that situation. Like I'm sure there is kind of like overlap, but for the most part they're doing Starfield, then they pivot full into Elder Scrolls 6, and until they pivot off of Starfield, they can't really dedicate full manpower to Elder Scrolls 6. So obviously, yeah, it was going to be super far off. Next one, PlayStation version is undecided, which is interesting. So they are not committing guaranteed that this is going to be a PlayStation game. So the next Elder Scrolls could be an Xbox exclusive, theoretically. That is actually a pretty big deal, and I feel like an overlooked deal when people keep talking about Starfield. Like, oh, they yanked Starfield off of PlayStation. The Sony fanboys are like pissed about it. And this is the more interesting thing to me because, again, Starfield, new IP, yes, from an accomplished game developer, but it's something that is new. Like, nobody's put their hands on. Like, we don't know what Starfield is going to ultimately look like when it's all said and done, like how it's going to run and what the reception is going to be. Elder Scrolls is a storied franchise, especially, Oblivion and onwards. And so that not having a PlayStation presence is a big deal. And I think that is a major get for Microsoft. And when we're talking about this day of these, at least call it timed exclusive or whatever, with these kind of Final Fantasies, what they're doing with Square, if they could have that with the Bethesda Game Studios over on Microsoft, I think that could be not a game changer. At this point, it is what it is. I don't know if there's any major game changers shy of I don't know, acquiring somebody that is EA. Maybe if they were able to just make like Madden exclusive, maybe that'll change the game. But for now, I think it's a big deal. But I don't think it's changed the tide of war type deal. What do you think?
Yeah, that's my thing, where it's like a back and forth, where it's like, oh, you haven't decided if PlayStation whatever 6 is gonna get it, Elder Scrolls 6. But it just makes me think. I was like, I could see it both ways, right? I could see him being like, listen, Elder Scrolls is so huge, let's get it everywhere. Again, you prop up the Game Pass, and day one over here, gotta prop up the $70, $80 it might be on PlayStation. But it also makes me think, like, well, they did say 5 years away, you're thinking next gen already. What a huge launch title to make exclusive. The next Elder Scrolls could entice a certain group of people, right? Not everyone, but just think about how Skyrim engulfed the world, and telling them, well, you can only get that over here and not on PlayStation. Would be kind of interesting. So it is one of those things where it's like, I'm surprised they were just so flippant about it, where they can, instead of, they've been pretty direct, where like, yeah, some things are going to stay exclusive, some of it, to be like, yeah, we haven't really decided. Now, obviously the game's still so early on in development, they have no idea what they're doing with it yet. They probably doesn't even have a name, let alone do they know where they're releasing it. But it does just make me wonder. It's like, I see it both ways. It's like, I could see that launching on PlayStation 6, or I could also see it in a world where after this finally goes through and a couple years have gone by, you know what? No, it is exclusive. Like they said, Starfield at some point was planned to be, at one point it was almost PlayStation exclusive or something like that. I remember.
They said something like that.
So would it be the craziest thing? It's like, I don't know. So it is weird, but it's kind of just intriguing to me.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I'm very conflicted about it, because on one hand, if you listen to Microsoft, they keep emphasizing this idea. It's like, hey, we're not selling as well as them. We don't have a majority of the market share. That doesn't seem like it's going to change anytime soon. And we'll get into it later, but the CEO talking about how, hey, I don't really like exclusives like that. If it was up to me, we'd have everything everywhere. But Sony makes it a thing. So they admit all of those things. And then on the other side of things, the idea that a corporation's not going to do everything in their power to change that. And historically, what moves consoles is exclusives. You say what you want, but, the fact that Nintendo has exclusive rights to Mario, Zelda, Pokemon makes a difference for their console. Yeah. It does. If Tears of the Kingdom was on PS5, would as many people play it on Switch? Hell no. You know what I mean? It just is what it is. And so it's one of those things where, like, I just have a hard time believing that they won't ultimately, like, on one hand, I understand they're going to be like, okay, if we don't have a majority of the market, isolating some of these big titles to our consoles only is going to ultimately cost us money. Like, money that we otherwise could have made. However, at the same time, if we have any hope of changing that and maybe increasing our market share, we have to play the game. So Microsoft is in a weird zone right now where they kind of are crapping all over the idea of exclusives because they haven't been able to get as many as they want. However, I get this tenor that they totally would be way more brutal and hardcore with the exclusives if they even had the option to do so, if they had more of these games presenting themselves. And so part of me thinks, okay, Elder Scrolls 6 is so far away. There's probably lots of things, even beyond the PlayStation version, that are undecided about it. It's so far off. Like, they haven't made a decision about that. They haven't made a decision about a lot of things probably related to that game. But at the same time, you can maybe have a more cynical view of it and be like, maybe that's a little wink and a nod. Like, hey, we're not sure if it'll be on PlayStation. I guess we'll see how it plays out, PlayStation. Let's see how you act. Like, it kind of reminds me of like the hey mom, are we going to Six Flags? Well, we'll see how you act. We'll see how school goes. You know what I mean? That's what. If you want to be more cynical, that I get a little bit of a big bro tenor to it, where it's like, and not that Microsoft's in a position of big bro Sony, but it definitely gives me a little bit of a vibe of like, we'll see how things play out. We're undecided on that one. Next one, we kind of alluded to already, so we don't have to spend too much time on it, but Microsoft doesn't have a PS5 version because Sony didn't send Microsoft dev kits, Phil Spencer says. And this sounds like maybe something that will continue going forward if that doesn't change, and if Sony has serious concerns about like sending dev kits to now Activision going forward, if this merger does go through, that could prevent lots of different games from being there anywhere. And I was talking earlier about launches, but this sounds like this is actually bleeding years later in of why Microsoft. So that sounds like, hey, you didn't send us a dev kit, we couldn't hit launch, and now we're not going to play ball with you to a certain extent. And so that's kind of interesting to me. Like, what did you think about that?
Yeah, this is one of the only points where I saw it and I was like, I just felt it that he's lying, because there's not a series version of Minecraft either. There is no Series S or X version of Minecraft.
Oh, so you think it's spin? That's interesting.
I think it's spin because then, okay, even if you did, then why isn't your home console, your new generation, have a version?
Yeah,
so that's
true.
The only thing where when I read that, I was like, liar. And it could be true, right? They probably didn't send them a dev kit, but why would that hold up your version of Minecraft? We're 3 years into the generation. You haven't. There was way early, before the consoles launched, I forgot who. Someone had a version of it that ran with ray tracing and stuff like that, but it was a super dev version.
Yeah.
So that's not available. You can't play that version. So it's like, well, did Sony hold you up doing it on your console? That's my only thing to it. I was just like, no, probably true. It makes sense, obviously. If you don't have a PS5 dev kit, you don't have a PS5 version, but it's like, well, you don't have your own version, so I'm confused where that all sort of spins out.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, like, theoretically, like, if I go on my Xbox right now, my Series X, and I fire it up, that's the Xbox One version, right? Maybe with some, like, uncapped frame rates and stuff like that, but it's still the Xbox One version?
Yep.
Oh, you see, that's a very interesting... I'm kind of aligned with you then. Like, yeah, it does sound like kind of a way to spin an existing situation, probably a non-issue, into something to take a shot at Sony, which is kind of funny. Yeah. The next one is very interesting. This has been one of the most debated topics related to Game Pass and whether it's good for gaming or not. But Sony boss Jim Ryan, many publishers think that Xbox Game Pass is value destructive. So during his testimony, Ryan said, I talked to all the publishers and they unanimously do not like Game Pass because it is value destructive. He also claimed Game Pass is unprofitable to Microsoft, which is true. When reached for comment, Xbox pointed to an Xbox Wire post that says that every Game Pass title announced at this year's Xbox Game Showcase is coming from a creator that's previously worked with the subscription service, which seems to kind of counteract maybe the idea that, like, hey, all these publishers hate Game Pass. And Xbox is like, well, then why are they lining up to work with us? Basically, it sounds like the argument back and forth. And so this is such an interesting part and wrinkle of the Game Pass thing, because I think you and I have been very open about the fact that it's undeniable that the value for gamers is undeniable. Like it's incredible. It's the best value in gaming. That's that whole little thing that they say. But it's true. When Game Pass is doing its thing, which again, it's important to note, Game Pass doesn't always have a great selection of games. Like it has a revolving door of things. Like sometimes it's better than other times. It keeps all the Microsoft stuff there. But yeah, like sometimes there's like really good stuff coming to it. Sometimes there's little dead zones. But generally speaking, value add wise, there's nothing touching it. Sony is getting there with their little platinum service thing with the PS3 backwards compatibility and all that. But yeah, Game Pass is a really impressive value. But this is what's interesting is we're talking on the publisher side now, which is basically like the idea that Game Pass causes people not to buy games, and when people do not buy games and instead pay for a subscription, maybe the back end money is a lot less because you get the money up front from Microsoft to put your game on Game Pass, and then that's effectively maybe it, as opposed to maybe the organic software sales numbers that you'll get in traditional games publishing on a platform. And so obviously you and I can only speculate because we're not privy to all the numbers. But what do you think of the idea that according to Jim Ryan, that Game Pass is value destructive? It devalues what people maybe think a game is worth. Maybe this kind of ties into that kind of race to the bottom iPhone thing that people have talked about. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think they both have sort of a leg to stand on, right? I do think some publishers have come out aside from this whole court thing and talked about how they don't like how Game Pass is, and other people love like, oh, we wouldn't have gotten our game finished if it wasn't for this, or wouldn't have sold like this. But it's like a mixed bag, right? Because I think we had that with the creators from Hi-Fi Rush, talked about how they thought the game was going to sell more. It didn't sell what they were kind of hoping for. Hi-Fi Rush everybody was talking about that weekend, but a lot of people didn't buy it. I haven't played it, and I'm gonna love it when I do. It's on my list. I just haven't. But there are people who looked at that, and despite it being a cool game, despite that, I believe that was Tango. Despite all that, they look at it and they're like, "Oh, well, that's a Game Pass game." But like, well, no, that's a full game. But I've heard that many times. I've seen on the different Discords I'm in and YouTube. Oh, this is great. I'll wait for Game Pass. So there is that sort of concept, which is why I feel like it is in both camps. So it's not shocking, but I don't think that. Do many publishers think that it's destructive? Well, some publishers probably do. Some publishers probably like it. There's probably some that are in the middle. There's people who haven't really tested that section out yet, because it still is sort of an unknown frequency, which is why we're always, as much as we're on and off Game Pass subscribers when there's value on there, but. We would both love to. I would just love to see the numbers. I'm not even a numbers guy. I'd love to see what this all works out to be. If it's half and half, right? If the publishers didn't want you to play their game on Game Pass, they wouldn't put it on Game Pass.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I know that's higher ups who make that decision, but that's where it would fall down to.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I have no doubt that Jim Ryan is telling the truth in terms of some of the conversations that he's had in the back end. I'm sure there are plenty of game developers and publishers that are like, hell no, the numbers don't make sense. Like, okay, Microsoft offered us this much to put our thing. We can make way more of that in this last quarter than if we were to put on Game Pass. So it absolutely doesn't make sense for certain people. But we've heard firsthand for any interviews that you've maybe watched from indie developers who otherwise their game would be an unknown without Game Pass. So it's not true that like this idea that like, hey, everybody hates Game Pass and it's devaluing it. But the devalue thing is a point I want to kind of like focus in on, because it actually is very reminiscent to the music industry. When you talk about music streaming and you hear from various artists, you've heard the very similar argument there, which it's like, hey, when music streaming came about, it devalued album sales. it no longer made sense to the consumer to buy an album when I can get it cheaper to just stream. Ownership doesn't mean anything to me anymore. Not me, but like the average consumer in the music world. Like obviously I buy vinyl albums and stuff like that. So physical media has kind of, that's a whole separate issue. But in terms of just like ownership, the willingness to put down this fixed amount of money for this product historically versus a new offering that is more economical, and the fact that in the music industry, people basically wash their hands of the album sales conversation, and until they were able to calculate streams, album sales plummeted. Now they look like they've recovered, but that's because they're factoring in streams, and there's money to be made via streaming, but it's so negligible. So nowadays music acts make a vast majority of their money through touring, basically, and through bundles and merch sales and all that, but it is not through the music itself. But once upon a time it was CD sales or vinyl sales, and then it went to iTunes sales, and now streaming is completely, you could say, devalued music. Not the art of it, but the literal monetary cost of what somebody says. When I tell you what is an album worth in 2023, once upon a time there would be $15, $20, $10, whatever. What does that mean now? I don't know. Whatever your Spotify subscription is for that month, and how many albums, depends how many albums you consume. You could consume the dozens and dozens of albums in a month, and you paid what, $8? So that's what it's worth. Divide 50 divided by 8 is what an album's worth to me now. That is, I think, what the concern is when it comes to video games. Is once upon a time when you say, like, what is a video game worth? People say $50, $60, now $70. But what they're arguing, I guess, is what that Game Pass is lowering that. And eventually maybe somebody is going to be like, well, I mean, if it's not, it's worth $15 a month to me. Whatever, where you work out the economics on the back end yourself, but I'm going to buy this subscription. I'm not going to outright buy this game. Because one thing, I don't need this game for indefinitely. I only need to, kind of get my rocks off, be entertained for a short period of time and move on. And it makes the most sense for my pocket. So I totally understand the aversion to it. However, I'm not one of these people who think that, like, streaming services are the automatic, like, death knell to artistry. You can make it work with TV, movies, music. I think they can make it work with games. But I do agree with Jim Ryan in the idea that, like, do I want everything to be a streaming service? No, because if it's just streaming services, you do end up with the music situation, which is, I don't think, good for the artist. So I think it has to be a hybrid model. Some games are going to fit in the streaming service. Some should get a full $70 release, and I think that's both of that's okay to me. You know what I mean? I think it's about the mix.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next one, Microsoft CEO. If it was up to me, I'd get rid of exclusives. This is from the Microsoft CEO, Satya Nadella, and he said that he has no love for console exclusives, but he explains that Microsoft plays the exclusive game to play competitive with market leaders. And this is kind of, I think, the inherent, well, I think not a lot of people, but some people ding Xbox about, especially this generation, and maybe kind of during mostly the Phil Spencer years, of this idea of, like, hey, play everything anywhere, but at the same time they kind of play that exclusive game. So it's like, are you pro or against exclusives? In terms of their actions, it's unclear, but obviously there's an intentionality in terms of leadership to that they don't love exclusives. However, ultimately making a profit is their only real concern. And so far, the gaming industry hasn't really shown an ability for the major 3 publishers I'm talking about, not like independent third-party publishers, but for the major 3, to make a console work without some exclusives. You know what I mean? Xbox wouldn't have sold a unit probably without Gears and Halo once upon a time. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or Forza moves it for some people. Last of Us, Ghost of Tsushima, Mario, Zelda. These are important games to move consoles. And if everything was available everywhere and there was no console exclusives, the industry would probably look a lot different. You know what I mean? What consoles would be successful and what, Nintendo might have a lot harder of a time moving units. Maybe some people, maybe suddenly now power is the major focus. But that's not where we are right now. So this is kind of an interesting story in terms of knowing where the CEO's mind of, but it's kind of a non-starter as far as, because it's kind of like if then if this was some alternate reality, then yeah, we do this, but we can't, so we're not. Basically, what did you think?
Yeah, it wasn't a weird one for me because it's like, what really made Xbox take off was its exclusives. The Forza back in the day, the Halo back in the day, obviously was the big one. So it's like, it's another one where I just looked at it and said, no, you wouldn't. You wouldn't get rid of exclusives. Would you like some of these exclusives? For sure. You're going to tell me if Microsoft would pass up the chance to get Spider-Man exclusive, and I know they brought that up. I don't know if it was this court case or another court case, but, I was like, you would love to get that exclusive. You would love to lock down Nintendo games. In a world Microsoft bought Nintendo, they're not going to put all those games on PlayStation. You wouldn't. For what reason would you do that? But that was again where it's just like, no, you didn't. Exclusive, make it worth it. At that point, you guys would all just be making a PC, and let the developers just make games for it. So, you'd have a PlayStation branded PC, Xbox branded PC, and Nintendo branded PC,
basically, and
it would just be down to that. Instead of doing what you need to get your exclusives and working the right way to do your exclusives. That was sort of my reaction to it, where I just looked at it and I just kind of shook my head. I'm like, if your exclusives were making Last of Us money, the Uncharted money, everything that Sony and Nintendo make with their exclusive, if your exclusives were doing that, you wouldn't say this on the record.
Yeah, you know what Microsoft kind of sounds a little bit like? They sound like that guy that's like walking down the street and be like, yo, shorty, man, you look so good. Let me get that number. And she rejects you and you're like, man, you ugly anyways. That's what they sound like. A little bit. Yeah. Like, they love exclusives, but now that they have trouble getting them, now we hate exclusives. They didn't hate exclusives during the 360 generation or their initial generation at all. But now suddenly it's like, we wish everything was everywhere. And it's like, I bet you do, seeing Last of Us. I bet you do. But I bet if like Halo Infinite lit the world on fire and put them into first place, they'd have nothing but exclusives. You know what I mean? They are pro having everything everywhere because I feel like they need to do that to survive, which is totally like respectable, and I understand that. Like, hey, not everybody could be the first place, so to some degree, not everybody can be Sony in terms of their strategy. So they need to develop things, but I think it's a little disingenuous for them to sit there and be like, we're fundamentally against exclusives, but to play the game we need to. Well, it's like, no, you're not fundamentally against them. You just like that you can't get them. And if people were lining up for Xbox exclusives, you'd have no problem saying yes to every single one of them. If suddenly, Bungie went up to Microsoft and was like, we're done with Sony. We want every Destiny and whatever forward game that we're gonna do exclusive to Xbox. Do you think for a second they'd hesitate on that? And they'd be like, oh no, sorry, we're fundamentally against exclusives. No, of course, they'd be all up on that. But again, that's why I always like to make a note that like these execs, you need to take everything they say with a grain of salt, because everything is spin. Everything is a game. Everything is spinning a narrative to result or craft things in some desired outcome. And that's not a shot at Xbox or a shot at Nintendo or a shot at Sony or Activision or anybody. It's just a reality thing. Like, these are people, these are the chief executive officers. These are people that are fundamentally brought in to maximize the profits of a general corporation. So these are not people operating out of the goodness of their heart, and I don't think they have a care about any of the general strategy outside of like, how can we dominate this industry and get rid of the rest of the competition, basically. Next one, Sony accidentally reveals that Call of Duty is worth $800 million to PlayStation alone, and that's the one thing I think some people talking about the story have missed. They're not talking about $800 million. Period. That's just the loss I think that Sony believes that they would incur if Call of Duty was taken away from PlayStation consoles going forward, and that is a 2021 figure. What did you think about that? That was unsurprising to me. I wouldn't have been surprised if they set a bill, to be honest with you, just because I know how big it is, especially post Warzone. I think once upon a time that maybe would have sounded a bit high, But especially when I know how big Warzone is, and the fact that that is agnostic outside of whatever yearly title that they're doing, and it's this just kind of existing platform. Now we're talking Fortnite numbers. Now we're talking PUBG numbers. Yeah. And you add that to a generally popular franchise, add that to the regular multiplayer modes and all the streaming and esports world, add that to zombies. Yeah, 800 million sounds about right. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, that's what I figure. I'm like, yeah, that sounds probably what it is. Yeah. And people were like, money wise, I'm like, no, it's the value that is Call of Duty. It's not counting so much the microtransactions that it is infiltrated Call of Duty now, but everything else. So yeah, I was surprised. I even looked at it, I was like, man, they probably even think it's probably even more than that. But yeah, again, based off their 2021 trajectories and everything like that, I was not shocked. I was like, no, yeah, that's probably, I mean, that's why they're so concerned. They're not concerned about losing Overwatch. They're concerned about Call of Duty for this reason.
Next one, and this is one that a lot of people have been reporting about, and it's kind of unsurprising because I'm pretty sure all corporations have this document, but because of Microsoft's acquisition, they had to publish it. Microsoft's considered buying lots of different game developers. So here we go. We got Thunderful, Supergiant, Niantic, Playrix, Scopely, Square Enix, which is a big one, Sega, which is the one I think a lot of people are really focusing on, Zynga, IO Interactive, and Bungie. Now, the key thing to remember when talking about these acquisitions is these are people that Xbox have seen a business interest in acquiring. If you look at the graphic, they have different things like, hey, this is what this developer does. This is the hole that they could fill in our first party team if we were to bring them in. This is not a document that says, hey, we had a meeting with so-and-so and they are really interested in joining Xbox Game Studios, so we're going to see if the economics work out. That's what people are reporting it like. Like at some point they sat at a table with Square Enix or Sega and they were close to inking a deal, and for whatever reason it didn't go through. No, not necessarily. This is more so just, it's a strategy thing again. This is where they could see a real added benefit from these different developers, and they're eyeing them. But again, it doesn't say that even Square Enix, Sega, Zynga, IO Interactive, any of these teams are even for sale to begin with. So that's worth mentioning. Anything surprise you here?
Not really. The Square Enix one, it threw me off a little bit just because of how Microsoft for so long was treating the sort of Japanese market, sort of just ignored the Japanese market. The Sega kind of makes sense. Sega went through a couple bad years, a couple of these other guys. The only one that kind of stuck out to me though was the Bungie, because Microsoft, it's like had this super close connection with Bungie for so long, you know. But Bungies have also come out and talked about multiple times, and people who've left talked about how under the thumb of Microsoft so much, though they made great Halo games, they were just pushed to another level with stress and all this stuff. So I'm surprised they would even think that, because I feel like Bungie would be like, oh, nah, there's no way. But again, money talks. Microsoft has that money to start talking. That's the only one that struck me where I'm like, I wonder if Bungie would even consider that, just because though they worked together for so many years, Bungie's never really talked about how fun it was. The best of the Halos always come out of some of the hardest times, and that's mainly for Bungie. So before Bungie was Bungie, Microsoft could have pulled the plug, and who knows what would have happened. But that's the only one that threw me off. Thunderful, IO kind of makes sense, just because of how everything went with Square and IO Interactive. Yeah. But that's the only one that just caught me where I'm like, I wonder if that's even. I'm sure they probably said, yeah, should we buy Bungie? I just don't think. Yeah, like you said, I think Square and Sega, even after all this stuff's come out, were like, hey, we're not for sale. Sega said something along the line. I forgot what Sega specifically said, but they're like, they don't even want to comment on this. On top of, they're like, they basically said they weren't for sale. They're like, yeah, listen, whether that was in talks is in the past, we're moving forward, which I like. I like that they were just kind of cleaning their hands of it. I don't know, but it is interesting.
Yeah, I was on the same boat pretty much. The only thing that really surprised me was Bungie, and that's because I assumed there was bad blood there. That would be kind of, again, it would be like if Konami was considering buying Kojima Productions. I assumed they kind of ended on not great terms, you know what I mean? Or at least because Bungie has been pretty open about yeah, that like it was not pleasant working under them. So I assume, especially with the fact that like and for better or for worse, say what you want about them. Like Microsoft does have 343, so like they filled that hole. Now you could say not effectively. You could totally say that, which is valid. But Bungie left. Now they have 343 working on Halo. Things were not great for them. Bungie now obviously has a really close relationship with Sony. I was just a little surprising. But again, this is also a document that I don't think is that new either. I think the document can date all the way back to 2019, which could also explain why maybe Bungie was included there and not. And maybe that conversation did happen because obviously they were willing to work with a larger publisher, aka eventually Sony. So I wouldn't be surprised if they took that meeting. IO I think could be kind of cool because I think Hitman could work as a Game Pass, like day one, the fun Xbox exclusive. It wouldn't be this major uproar like, hey, you pulled this away from Sony. I think that could work. Niantic was interesting because I would assume they'd probably go to Nintendo before anybody, if Nintendo was interested. Niantic's also interesting because they know how to make a really solid kind of AR phone game. However, they haven't really done it again since Pokemon Go. So this is somebody that like they hit fire, but are they a one-hit wonder? I don't know, but that's speculative. But yeah, not a surprising thing here. But the Sega thing, I think, it really excited a lot of people because I think Sega selling has been a conversation since the Dreamcast basically, and I think this is the closest we've gotten to like a hint maybe there was a conversation, but again I think people are putting a little bit more gas on this than actually exists, and I think if Sega sells, I don't think it'd be to Microsoft. I still don't think that. I wouldn't think it would happen with Nintendo first, and I know that sounds crazy to some people, but the way that they're working with them on their virtual console, for example, and the fact that there's Genesis games on there and all the collections are on there, and they're obviously no bad blood there now, they're willing to work with each other. I don't know, I feel like they'd be a partner with Nintendo before anybody, but that's speculative. Last point, Xbox's Phil Spencer seemingly decided to make all ZeniMax games exclusives in 2021 meeting. For y'all that don't know, now we're talking basically the online side of Bethesda type things. This is specifically, I think, ESO is what would be most affected by ZeniMax. That makes a ton of sense to me with these kind of like games as a service, live platform, whatever you want to call it, live service games. Exclusivity can really be important. However, I feel like crossplay also can be really beneficial for those type of games. You really want as many people as possible to play that game, but I understand where, like, in terms of profit sharing, you can maximize your income by having it all coming in from one single place. So this was unsurprising. I think it's a somewhat smart move, but I also think it's a dangerous move because when you these games live or die based on player base, and exclusives can evaporate that. So it's something worth keeping an eye on, but it's unsurprising. If there was one thing from Bethesda that I felt like could become a hard exclusive, it was probably ESO. What do you think?
Yeah, it's one of those things where it just kind of made sense. Where it's like, well, ZeniMax, it's like, well, it's a weird thing where they said that because ZeniMax has their hands in so much that Bethesda does. So it's like, what specifically? That's why I pretty much was like, what are they specifically relying on? The online section, the ESO. So it made a lot of sense when they decided that. I'm surprised it was even 2021 that they were willing to state that.
Yeah, it's pretty early.
But it's just one of those things where it kind of makes sense, though.
Yeah. So now that we have all this information, we've seen this all play out. I think you and I are both kind of over this back and forth between all of them at this point. Hearing all of this, what are your general opinions about this acquisition? Do you want it to go through? Do you not want it to go through? Do you think it's a positive, a negative? Do you think is this even the right thing for Xbox to be doing? Do you think with our non-legal brains, do you think the FTC and Sony even have a good argument here? What are your like kind of summarized thoughts about this whole thing?
Yeah, I can't wait till this is over. Either way, I've seen just a little bit of some other people talking about the more the legal aspect, where it's like this is more just delaying it, and we've talked about how that might be a plan for Sony themselves. But yeah, I can't wait till this is over. It's gonna go through. In my non-official legal opinion, it's gonna go through. Will it go with probably some caveats? Yeah, they're probably gonna have to sign something a little bit more definitive for maybe. I mean, Call of Duty's the big one they keep bringing up. And that seems to be the one they care about the most. But again, who knows what they'll legally be able to. These are companies with some fat lawyers, fat stacked lawyers. So I just don't see a world where it doesn't go through. Again, my thing is there'll probably be a small little asterisk where they'll have to be a little bit more definitive on what's gonna leave or what can leave when it leaves. And that's just sort of me from the way outside from home on my couch. That's how I see it.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I'm not super far from you. So I think it's absolutely going to go through inevitably. I don't know if it's going to come with legal caveats, but I think it's going to come with some concessions to Sony just to kind of play ball a little, but to kind of make things a little easier, like to kind of get them off their ass a little bit. Maybe I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft agrees, like, here, we'll give you A, B, and C, and we'll work with you on this, and then. But I think when it's all said and done, it's probably going to go through. Yeah, I don't, and I think Sony thinks that as well. I think really they're just kind of delaying the inevitable because, as competition, you have an interest in resisting these kind of things, because I don't think this is going to help Sony, so might as well resist it and see where you get, and maybe cost them some money or get what you want in the process. Maybe it's kind of like a divorce negotiation, you know what I mean? See what you can get out of it, and so it seems a little bit more that than anything. I think it's a smart decision for Xbox to do, but I am not a fan of it. And I'm not a fan for it because I'm not a fan of I don't like mergers. I don't like consolidation in general, because I think it's going to hurt when it's all said and done. And I know a lot of people may disagree with me on this, but I think when it's all said and done, the less people in control of a whole industry is going to be a net negative for the player when it's all said and done. Look at the cable industry, look at the music industry, look at the food industry. When you have so few players controlling so much, they're gonna do anti-competitive, anti-consumer things, and you can't do anything about it because they control everything. And so consolidation, I think, is generally a bad trend. But if you want to look in the most kind of like two-dimensional, literally here and now Xbox fan perspective, yeah, I think this is going to be good for Xbox fans. I think so, because it's going to be more Activision games on Game Pass. It's going to be more exclusives that people can, I guess, justify their purchase with, which I never understood that kind of argument. Why players themselves are so pro-exclusive for consoles that they have. Like, I don't get it, but yeah, I think it could have that benefit. But I think there are going to be unintended side effects from this. I think this is going to cause a major ripple effect. Once this goes through, I think to a certain extent there's going to be a reaction from Sony. It's like, oh, okay, it's like that. Cool, got it. And I think they're totally going to move on some bigger. I think to some degree Microsoft has upped the ante a little bit. Like Bethesda was one thing, or like when Sony buys this team or that team or works with Bungie or whatever, that was one thing. But when you're moving into Activision territory, there, I think what you would consider probably the big three of, you could consider maybe four if you want to put Rockstar in there. But when I think of big publishers that are not the major three console creators, we're talking Activision, EA, and Ubisoft, basically. And you could argue about Ubisoft slipping because their financials are not great right now. But, shoot them some bail. It's those three. And basically, they just bought one of the three. I would be very surprised if Sony doesn't immediately move to grab one of the other two. Whether it gets it's successful or not is an entirely different thing, because EA has some stuff that is not insignificant. You know what I mean? But Yeah, I think this upped the ante a little bit, and I think this is going to be one of the first major steps that people look back on when it's all said and done, and the entire game industry is run by two Saudi companies. People are going to look back on this, and it's like that was probably something that we probably shouldn't have championed so much, is these major corporations gobbling up everybody. I think because one day I wouldn't be surprised if they gobble up all these small teams and then somebody gobbles them up. And now that's what I'm just saying. It's like a cautious thing. It's not me being like apocalyptic guy, but it's more so like just it's worth considering the idea that this might not be a good thing. But again, that's not from like a Sony fanboy perspective. I don't care about the exclusive thing. They can do that if they want. But I think the consolidation could be worrisome for anybody who is not paying attention to larger trends. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. It is something that, as many people don't care, it's something you have to watch deeply, just because it will affect what goes on in the future, for sure. Not just gaming-wise, but company-wise, acquisition-wise, all the stuff that people are fearing.
Totally.
All right. So on the flip side, for people who aren't at each other's throat, we had a Nintendo Direct. And there's a couple things. And just so we don't, I'll go through the ones that we thought were more important. Starting off with the two bigger ones, actually. So we knew Mario definitely was coming back to Switch. It's been a little while. So two new Mario Brother games announced for Switch. We have Super Mario RPG Remake, the long-awaited and locked up Square Nintendo partnership in Mario RPG and The Legend of the Seven Stars, I think. They shortened it just to Mario RPG. Coming to Switch this year, also, they showed a new Super Mario Bros. 2D style game, not in the vein of the new Super Mario Bros., which I'm glad they finally left that behind them. We got a new art style, it looks like a new feel to the game and everything like that. So two big Mario games that vastly different, but they both actually look really great. I'm really excited to get into them. What did you think of these two Mario games?
Yeah, I was pretty excited about Wonder. I like the 2D Mario games, generally speaking, and so I was definitely excited to jump in. When I saw it, I was like, okay, some people might be a little bit let down by this for two reasons. I know like 2D Mario games are not everybody's jam. I like them quite a bit. I think they're kind of fun to go in and out of, and then you kind of move on with your life. This is probably one of the more muted Mario games we've seen in a bit. You know what I mean? Like, there's no major, like, crazy aesthetic shift. It is a very pretty game, and I think there is a little bit of art direction shift that I don't know if everybody noticed. Yeah. It's pretty straightforward of a 2D Mario game. But I'm totally sold on it. I mean, it doesn't take much. I like 2D Mario, so long as you're not literally just doing a port of an existing game that I've already played a million times before. I'm down to give it a shot. RPG Remake, that's the thing. Like, I think this is a super smart move. It looks pretty good. These are like the RPGs from Nintendo that I'm probably the least interested in, and that might be heresy, but like Mario and Luigi, like the Superstar Saga, Partners in Time stuff, I kind of like more than RPG, just the classic RPG game. Like, I played it. I don't have a ton of nostalgia for it because I didn't experience it until much later. I didn't play it until I was like in middle school or something like that. I didn't grow up with this game, so like I'm not in love with the original one, and so I'm probably gonna skip that one. But it does look really good, and I think it's gonna be a pretty big game for those that are really into it, because I know it's a bit of a cult classic from what I understand in the Nintendo side of things.
Yeah, and then next they showed up a Detective Pikachu is returning in a new game. They didn't call it Detective Pikachu 2. I don't have much to say about this. I'm not a fan of this style of game just because it's very throwback to sort of point-and-click adventure detective stuff. I tried the demo on 3DS forever ago. I guess I can see the charm just because there's a Pikachu speaking English. And I thought they already told us this was coming back, but I think this is the full reveal we got. Any feelings towards that?
I'd be lying if I said I didn't even know what this game is. Like, I've never played Detective Pikachu. Is it like a mystery game like Professor Layton? I don't know. But yeah, no, I'm cool. I'm cool on that.
A quick one: Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has shown the new couple new courses that are coming alongside the finally. Now we have some of the DLC characters that are coming out. Petey Piranha, Wiggler, and Kamek joining the crew. I still haven't played the last batch just because they're so random when they drop this. But again, I'm never gonna be too mad at. I thought we were closer to being done with the deluxe season pass thing, but I guess not.
I think this is the last set too.
It might, yeah. I think this might be the last set, but so yeah. Again, I redeemed the thing when I had the Nintendo Online, so of course I'll play these when I get a chance to it. But I'm also, every time I launch Mario Kart 8, though I love it, I'm just like, I'm ready for something new, Mario Kart-ish. How about you?
I'm all over this. You already know that. No, I mean I play every set as they come out, and then I go back to get all my trophies, my gold trophy on it. So it looks good, and I'm just surprised about the characters. I didn't expect that. They kind of held that into like the last two sets or something like that. So
really weird.
We all knew they were adding like new courses, but yeah, I totally did not expect them to be adding like a decent amount of new characters. Nobody like mind blowing here. At this point, they're really going into the vaults like of like characters you could even choose anymore. Overall, I'm happy with it, and I'm gonna play the hell out of this for sure.
Another sort of quick one: Luigi's Mansion 2: Dark Moon, which was released for 3DS, getting a Switch port. I'm excited for this just because these are one of those games. I've played Luigi's Mansion 1, that's it. I've never played Dark Moon, and I never played 3. I have to assume they're going to be working on porting Luigi's Mansion 1 over as well, because that did get remade on the 3DS. So if they could port the second one, I'm assuming you could port the remake of the first one.
Totally.
You could have all 3 on there, so I'll be excited if I can ever just play 1, 2, and 3 right back to back on Switch. How are you feeling on the remake? Did you play the original launch?
So I played the first one and I played the third one. This is the only one that I've never played, so I don't really know much about it, and I'm willing to try this remaster depending on... I don't know much about Dark Moon, so if it really is just another Luigi's Mansion game, I'll probably pass on it, because again, if I want nostalgia, I'll play Luigi's Mansion 1, and if I want like new Luigi's Mansion, I'll play 3. So I don't really have a need for this one, depending if there's like, again, if it happens to have a really good story and it does its own thing and it's very different from the other ones, I'll totally jump into it. But from what I understand, it was just a 3DS Luigi's Mansion game. So if they're remaking that, I'm kind of cool on that. But I'm happy for the Luigi's Mansion fan, and I totally think they need to get all these games on the same console. There's no reason why they shouldn't be. So, one has been remade, so I think it should be a relatively easy kind of thing to just get it onto Switch and cleaned up. And I think it should get the Pikmin treatment, basically, what they're doing with them.
Yeah, that's how I kind of feel. A free-to-play adventure sim, Palea, yeah.
Palea.
Palea. I don't have much to say. It looks like a sort of adventure sim, like a relaxing MMO type deal. So I don't have much to say. Is this any interest for you?
Free to play always concerns me, but like kind of running around in a multiplayer game that I don't have to put money into, that I can kind of just like screw around, especially with the cozy thing. I could see killing a little time in this, but it depends if it's good or not. If it's bad, then which I'm skewing towards it's probably gonna be not great, but yeah, no, I have my eye on it. I could see it being kind of a goofy, fun game to run around a world with some friends or something like that, and hop on a little chat or something.
Yeah, that's how I kind of feel. It's like if I see it get some traction, or if I have a free weekend once,
exactly.
Maybe I'll give it more of a look. So the last one we're going to talk about is Penny's Big Breakaway, which I don't know, man. It just looks so Nintendo. Vain in a 3D platformer that we've seen on Nintendo before. I'm not sold on the art style of it. I like what I see of it, though. I like sort of the mechanics. It does have sort of a throwback to, I guess you could say, like classic Nintendo games in a sense. Like you could have put any other character there. But it looks exciting. Again, debating price and everything like that, and when and where. But it does look kind of interesting. I don't remember who's. I think it's Evening Star is making it. I don't know. There's something that just kind of struck me. I'm like, yeah, that kind of looks kind of cool. to just sort of checklist off one day, but I'm not wish listing, pre-ordering it anytime soon. What did you think?
Yeah, this is one of those games that I think I'm sold on it, not because of what I saw, but because of who's making it. Because Sonic Mania was what it was, and I'm so excited to see this team actually kind of grow and do their own thing. That's why I have my eye on it. It's not that I saw something super mind-blowing, even though I can get into a classic 3D platformer throwback. There's this game, I forget the name of it, where you kind of throw your hat. I forget the name of it. You play as this girl with a hat, and it's like a 3D platformer. Yeah, I think I've shown it to you before. And so I can get into kind of a retro. Same thing with like the Spyro remaster. Like if it's done right, I can get into kind of something that harkens back to the kind of like N64, PS1 kind of era with like a nice coat of paint. I can get into that. But yeah, it depends how it's designed. But again, if it has half the level of care that they put into Sonic Mania, I think this could be a really solid game.
Yeah. A Hat in Time, I think.
A Hat in Time, yeah. That game was pretty good. So
that game was good. I never got to beat it though, but I did forget this was the Mania team.
Yeah, that's the big thing.
Which makes sense because it does have a little of that sort of Sonic 3D era vibe, but in like a way different form.
It's got like a Genesis art style to it, like the Genesis box art kind of style to it.
Yeah, definitely something you would have seen like on Dreamcast Genesis for
totally.
Sure. But it is. That's right. That's why I did have it. I was like, man, I remember I was excited for this for some reason because I think they even mentioned it in the direct.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And that was the pretty much the big highlights. There was a couple other things they discussed, but it's things we've already talked about here on the show. All in all, it was good to get a couple of these things out. It was a good direct. It was as good as what we saw from PlayStation a few weeks or Xbox a few weeks ago. Yeah, it all depends what you're looking for. You got me with a little bit more Mario Kart. You got me with a new Super Mario Brothers, an original style. So for me, it was kind of what I went in expecting 0. So just getting a few stars really stuck out to me. How did you feel about the direct?
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat. I think this was a direct that was as good as it needed to be. It had a little bit of everything for like the Nintendo ecosystem. It technically had two new contributions from its major IP. So you get 2 new Mario games. You get some more Mario kart stuff. You got a lot of indie games getting some love. Luigi's Mansion remaster. Like there are some things that they talked about and showed off for the first time that kind of illuminates specifically my only expectation coming out of the Nintendo Direct, or not even expectation, but questions, is the release schedule. Things like I knew there was Pikmin 4, but things looked pretty barren going forward because Nintendo's had this strategy of holding things really close to its chest before it comes out, which I've really come to quite love because it's like the opposite of the Bethesda strategy.
Exactly.
So I kind of like that. Like things are empty, but you can, unlike some other developer, like for example, like Microsoft's slot is empty, but we know it's empty because probably nothing's going to come out. Where Nintendo, we know things are going to come out, we just don't know what it is yet. And so that's why I like these. And yeah, Nintendo Direct was super solid. Yeah, nothing for me that was like mind-blowing, but at this point, shy of like new hardware, I don't know if there's too much that you could reasonably expect from Nintendo to really blow your mind. Like they are kind of on the tail end of the life cycle of a device, so at this point it's kind of just feeding the existing base, dropping some new stuff that have kind of been in the works. And I would imagine any of the major mind-blowing projects are probably coming out on the next console, or they're just in a stage of incubation that are not worth showing, aka like a Metroid Prime 4.
Exactly.
Stuff like that, I think, like who knows where that is in the cycle, but most of the major things. So obviously we're not going to see Zelda again until well into the next generation. The next mainline the next 3D Mario game probably is going to probably be closer to like a launch title for whatever the Switch successor is going to be. So for right now, this is as good as I think it needs to be, giving the existing player base, which is freaking huge at this point, well over 100 million people, just something to play. And then I'm sure coming this fall they'll have more Pokemon news, and so and God could only hope it's better than Scarlet and Violet. things are starting to fill up a little bit, and generally speaking, I'm not feeling too bad about Nintendo's place right now. Like they have a little bit of everything for everybody in their ecosystem. They're not doing anything to pull people in anymore, for sure. Which I think they've hit critical mass. Like everybody I think who is interested in Switch has probably got one at this point. So I don't think they really need to do a whole bunch of legwork into convincing people to like come in at this point. So that's why the smaller things like the Luigi's Mansion remaster, Detective Pikachu RPG remake, those the little Peach game that's coming, those type of things I think are the perfect type of projects because they're not these major overhauls that require all hands on deck at Nintendo, but at the same time can keep a steady stream of titles coming out where at no point do you look at it and could in good faith say like Switch got no games. Like you couldn't say that. So I'm feeling good about it.
Yeah, same here. But
all right, episode 100. Thank you guys for sticking with us this long. It's crazy. We're finally in the triple digits. Took us a minute to get here. But I'm pretty excited to see what the hundreds bring us, and things are really starting to fire up in terms of the stories, and we'll have more stories to talk to you guys, and inevitably, unfortunately, more Microsoft FTC news I'm sure will be coming because I do not think this is done. No. But hopefully they give us a little bit of rest in recovery time before we have to talk about that again. But yeah, this is the NeoVintage podcast. I'm Dubrell, and I'm here with
Steve. Hope you guys enjoyed.
And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.